it detracts from the beauty. If anything, it only accentuates it.
And it's barely begun.
Exactly.
Already you've had a lyrical experience. More than one.
Just wait until we'll have to extend the panel come mid-July.
Very hard to get an unbiased opinion from Emil on this matter. German newspaper Welt am Sonntag, having all the confidence in the world in their team, couldn't resist in advance of the Mexico game. Sorry, Mexico, today we build the wall. Oh, no. That is just, Emil, that is tempting fate there, isn't it?
Hubris really ends well in football, I would say, and pride goes before the fall, as Germany found out.
Well, it's surprisingly soon for Germany to be making wall jokes.
Yeah, well, that's right. Emil, just quickly, anything that we should particularly look forward to in the next couple of days?
Or
even the end of the week?
I can't actually think right now about the games that are coming up. However, there is a new episode of Squeaky Bum Time coming out tomorrow, which everybody should listen to and download.
That's an important thing. All right, thank you very much. Emil Donovan on the World Cup. Thank you, Emil. Now, speaking of the wall, the American administration is mounting a defence of its separation of illegally immigrating parents from their children. Just a quick question on this. And here's the defence, or at least part of it. This administration did not create a policy of separating families. What has changed is that we no longer exempt entire classes of people who break the law. So the White House is saying today the children aren't held in wire cages, they get fed well, they can watch TV. And it's a policy that'll make people think twice about crossing the border. So this is the zero tolerance policy. Do you find it plain abhorrent, or do you find it the tough means to a legitimate end?
I actually watched Secretary Nielsen defending herself this morning, and I could see that they've done a lot of work on finessing this thing, and there is a plausible argument she can make on the face of it, but it's still abhorrent because it put me in mind of the picture of Saddam Hussein with those children who were being used as part of the families who were taken from the British Airways flight as human shields. And it's that same principle of using a child as a hostage for as your negotiating tool. And I find that objectionable. They're saying that they're now following the law, and the law requires this. They hadn't made the decision. They weren't following it from the day they took office. It seems quite unlikely to me that that if they wanted to, they couldn't soften it. And here's another thing. It seems to me quite likely, given that this president is so enamoured of executive orders, that it should be possible to create some kind of executive order that says that gives them permission to suspend this aspect of the law that they purport to find difficult.
All right. What's your view?
No, I just think it's revolting. It's revolting.
All right, Arlene, on a more cheerful note.
Go on.
Social media users up in arms over Prince George playing alongside Princess Charlotte and the Duchess of Cambridge with a toy gun. Not only a toy gun, but a toy knife and a pair of handcuffs.
Oh, my goodness me.
What do you reckon?
Well, as long as he's not in America, he'll be all right. I mean, I grew up with guns, and look at me, I'm fine.
You're one of the most peace-loving people I've met.
I played with guns, but look, I say that if you're in America, forget it.
What do you think?
He'll be in the military like his father and his father before him and his father before him. I don't know.
But then no harm, says David Slack.
He'll be shooting
Give him
pheasants.
something else.
David Slack, Julia Hartley-Moore, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
A lovely hour, and we're back with another one tomorrow on the panel. Thanks, everybody, for your company.
Kia ora, good evening. I'm Rowan Quinn and for John Campbell tonight on Checkpoint, and we start with breaking news. The Security Intelligence Service has launched an internal investigation into its dealings with the controversial security firm Thompson & Clark. The Director General of the SIS, Rebecca Kitteridge, says she has concerns about the professionalism of her staff and whether they were biased towards Thompson & Clark. We'll have more from our reporter Zach Fleming, who's working on this developing story. Also tonight, the government agrees to loosen its foreign house buyers ban, and New Zealand football looks set to announce an investigation into the conduct of the coach Andreas Heraf following a formal letter of complaint penned by multiple members of the Football Ferns.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Bat in Aho. All government agencies will come under scrutiny as part of an inquiry into the use of the controversial security firm Thomson & Clark. The State Services Commissioner announced the extended inquiry today, saying he was concerned about what has surfaced so far. Sarah Robson has more.
In March, the Commissioner, Peter Hughes, announced the inquiry after it was revealed the firm spied on Canterbury earthquake claimants for Southern Response. The inquiry was further widened to include the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, which had been spying on Greenpeace staff. Today, Mr Hughes announced that the inquiry would now cover all government agencies. He says he's concerned about what has surfaced in the inquiry to date and new information now available about other agencies. The fresh material came to light in official information requests to the Ministry for Primary Industries and the Security Intelligence Service. Ko Sarah Robson, Aho.
New Zealand has reached agreement with Singapore over the foreign house buyers ban by allowing an exemption for Singaporean buyers. The issue arose when the new government confirmed it would go ahead with a ban on foreign buyers purchasing residential homes in New Zealand after it was elected last year. Here's our political editor Jane Patterson.
The ban introduced by the coalition government contravened the closer economic partnership deal New Zealand has with Singapore. The Trade Minister David Parker says that's been resolved after months of negotiations. However, Singapore has agreed to review the exemption if there's a material increase in house sales to Singaporean buyers. The government has also agreed to allow overseas buyers to purchase apartments off the plan to help ensure large-scale developments can proceed to completion. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
Dozens of people are missing after a ferry sinking in Indonesia. The ferry went down on Lake Toba, a popular tourist destination in northern Sumatra. At least 18 people were rescued and one person has been confirmed dead, but rescue workers say the ferry had at least 80 passengers on board. Rescue teams are battling heavy rain and large waves if they continue the search for survivors. Distressed relatives of the missing passengers are waiting for news at the Tigaras port. The government says district health boards and nurses need to work out how they allocate a $500 million pay package on offer, as it won't be making any more money available. Nurses are preparing for 2 24-hour strikes next month if they can't reach an agreement with DHBs about pay and working conditions. The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, says the parties are welcome to rearrange how that money is spent to suit their needs.
We believe that it's an offer that's worth considering, but ultimately it'll be up to the nurses and the DHBs to decide if there's any reorganisation of that offer that they want to make. But we've been very clear this is the amount of money available for this offer.
Grant Robertson. The mother of a student at Hato Petera College on Auckland's North Shore says the government has given up on the school. The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, says he intends to close the Catholic Māori school after mounting concern over its finances, staffing and low student numbers. School supporters have 28 days to respond before the government makes its final decision. The mother of one of the last 5 remaining students, Phyllis Pomare, says the government hasn't done enough to save the school.
We're trying to get the school up and running, but the diocese are against us, and the minister seems to be sitting back and just doesn't want to talk to us. It just seems that the viability of Māori students are not at Hato Petera. Māori students at Hato Petera is not on their books.
Phyllis Pomare. The man dubbed New Zealand's first serial killer has been released from prison. Hayden Poulter has been given parole after serving time at Whanganui prison for the murder of a massage parlour owner and 2 prostitutes in 1996, as well as rape and attempted murder. He's regarded as a moderate risk of reoffending and will be subject to 11 standard parole conditions for life, 15 special conditions for a period of 5 years, and banned from consuming alcohol and drugs for the remainder of his life. Poulter will be monitored by GPS for the next 5 years. A Kapiti Coast District councillor found guilty of indecently assaulting a council employee has been convicted and fined $1,500. David Scott, who's 71, was accused of rubbing his genitals against the woman staffer during a council morning tea in April last year. Anne-Marie May reports.
David Scott spent 4 days on trial in the Wellington District Court last month before being found guilty by a jury after 3.5 hours deliberation. The defence lawyer Mike Antonovic suggested today a conviction would be punishment enough for Scott. However, Judge Peter Hobbs said there were serious aggravating features to Scott's offending, including that he was an elected official and his victim was a senior council employee who was entitled to be treated with courtesy and respect at work. The judge said he could not give Scott credit for remorse because he had shown none and continued to maintain his innocence. This is Anne-Marie May.
It's 5:05. Sport, an independent investigation into the breakdown of the relationship between the Football Ferns coach Andreas Heref and his players, is set to be announced by New Zealand Football. The national body's confirmed it has received a letter from the Professional Footballers Association listing several complaints from members of the New Zealand women's team. Clay Wilson reports.
The complaints are believed to relate to the team environment under Heref, and the national body says it's treating the issue as a matter of priority. Players Association Chief Executive and former All-White Harry Nata says they want an independent investigation undertaken, and RNZ understands that's likely to be confirmed tomorrow. Problems between the players and Heref initially arose during a trip to Spain earlier in the year, and were compounded in the build-up to the recent 3-1 loss to Japan. Following that match, Heref was heavily critical of the team, which earned the ire of former players and didn't go well with football followers. This is Clay Wilson.
The New Zealand driver Brendan Hartley's Formula One future appears to be safe. Red Bull Motorsports consultant Dr. Helmut Marko has told Germany's motorsportmagazine.com that the team is no longer considering dropping Hartley. In recent weeks, Toro Rosso was shopping around for a replacement, but Marko's comments suggest Hartley can now relax a little.
There was a bit of noise in the background over the last couple of weeks. It was a bit annoying, but that's part of the business, and I actually felt really good about how I handled the whole situation. Didn't let it affect me.
Brendan Hartley will compete in the French Grand Prix this weekend. That's the news.
Towering insurance premiums.
We are in a risk area and building costs have gone up, but certainly wasn't expecting a 300% increase.
New homes, but how sturdy?
It's not gold plating, it's actually building to a level that's going to be comfortable. I'd describe the way we build houses now to be pretty crap.
And how stable is the interim leadership?
We've got to be far more vigilant. These people like us, they never sleep.
Rusted On. Morning Report with Guy and Espiner and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, how governments can collect and use big data more effectively to make better policy decisions. And after 10, food historian Mark Kalansky on his latest work, The Rich History of Milk. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, a few showers today. Rain tomorrow with heavy falls and possible thundery downpours. Auckland, Coromandel and northern Waikato, cloudy periods and a few showers today. Periods of rain or showers tomorrow, mainly in the north. For the remainder of Waikato down to Kapiti, including Bay of Plenty and the central high country. Fine spells and a few showers today, mainly fine tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington, cloudy periods and a few showers, clearing Wellington tomorrow morning. For Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, cloudy at times with a few showers, mainly about the coast. For Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, fine. The Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and a few showers. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks very much, Katrina. I'm Rowan Quinn in for John Campbell. And first up tonight on Checkpoint, some breaking news. The Security Intelligence Service has launched an internal investigation into its dealings with the controversial security firm Thompson & Clark. The Director General of the SIS, Rebecca Kitteridge, says she has concerns about the professionalism of her staff and whether they were biased towards Thompson & Clark. And this comes on the same day the State Services Commissioner widened his inquiry into the use of the firm to cover all government agencies, with Peter Hughes saying there's evidence of serious staff misconduct. Well, our reporter Zach Fleming learned of the SIS investigation in the past hour and has covered Thompson & Clark for the last few months. Zach, what do these documents show?
Well, Rebecca Kitteridge, the Director General of the SIS, says that she's concerned about the level of professionalism from her staff because of the tone of the emails that her staff are sending. And it's mainly just one of her staff members that's in her Protective Security Requirement team. We learned of all this through the Official Information Act, and the Protective Security Requirement Team, for people listening who don't know, the government's expectations for managing personnel, physical and information security. the tone of these emails between this SIS staff member and Gavin Clark from Thompson and Clark are all very, very chummy. They are old friends. One of the emails says that they were to meet in front of the archives somewhere, I'm not sure, and it will be like old times. They meet up for beers weekly on occasion, and one of Gavin Clark's emails in response was, "A beer sounds smashing." So these two are clearly old friends. And in that, Gavin Clark emailed this SIS staff member and asked if GNS is covered by these protective security requirements, if they're required to set them up. This SIS staff member then replied they could be. It may be worth going to them to see if they want to book you. Gavin Clark then emailed again and said, "I'm keen for any protective security requirement work." He was approaching this SIS staff member, who was also a good friend of his, to ask for work. And the staff member then replied that he should contact the district health boards. And the SIS staff member then put him in touch with the district health boards. So Gavin Clark is using his friends in the SIS to help him book contracts with government agencies, which is what it seems Rebecca Kitteridge is worried about here, that her staff members are showing bias and favouritism towards Thompson and Clark, because there are lots of other private security firms who can do this work, but it seems that Thompson and Clark may be getting these contracts because of Gavin Clark's friends internally. The same thing also happened with the Ministry of Justice. Gavin Clark was put in touch with them to arrange a potential contract because of his friend in the Security Intelligence Service. And we've also reported on Checkpoint that Thompson and Clark set up the protective security requirements for the Department of Conservation. And we've learned now through these emails that we have just received in the last hour that Gavin Clark only approached the Department of Conservation to do that work because he asked his friend in the SIS if Doc would need to do that. So in summary, Rebecca Kitteridge is very concerned about this because her staff member seems to be a very old friend of Gavin Clark, who is helping him book contracts with government agencies.
And is the main part of it sort of using a mate to try to scope for work, or is there other sort of potentially unprofessional conduct that's come out?
There is some other unprofessional conduct as well. We haven't gone through in detail. There are about 80 to 100 pages of emails here, but one that does stand out as well as booking contracted work is one here where Gavin Clark wasn't able to go to a protective security forum in July 2016 because he didn't RSVP in time. He was late. And he emailed his friend at the SIS and asked, do you think it would be do you think I would be able to attend? His friend at the SIS emailed him back very chummily, as per usual, saying, try this person. So he put him in contact with the right person to go to, and he said, I quote, "Use some of the sob story from below, but cut away some of my prompts." So a staff member from the SIS was helping Gavin Clark hopefully go to this protective security forum where, if you weren't Gavin Clark, you probably wouldn't have received this level of assistance. Gavin Clark wasn't actually able to go, but his friend in the SIS said, if it were my gig, I would have said yes. So again, this just reiterates a very chummy relationship with this SIS staff member, which is what Rebecca Kitteridge is concerned about and has now launched an internal investigation to look into.
And Zach, as we were saying before, this has only really just come out in the last hour or so, most of this. Who have you gone to try to talk to about it?
We've contacted the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister to ask for comment from them. We're yet to have a yes or a no either way. We also contacted Rebecca Kitteridge from the SIS to see if she would talk to us about this, but her staff said that the emails and their response announcing an internal investigation is all they want to say at this stage.
Thanks very much for that. That is our reporter Zach Fleming with that breaking news there. Well, the government has agreed to loosen its foreign house buyers ban and will now exempt all Singaporean buyers and anyone who buys apartments off the plan. MPs considering the legislation have identified a number of fishhooks with the law change that effectively bans most foreign buyers purchasing residential New Zealand homes. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The newly elected government had to act quickly last year to start the process for the foreign buyers ban before renegotiating the TPP trade deal. But the new policy contravened a trade deal already in place with Singapore, the closer economic partnership. New Zealand has been negotiating for months to find a solution, which the Trade Minister David Parker says has now been reached.
We've agreed with Singapore that they will have a carve-out. We have a side letter with them which says that if there is a material increase in the number of houses being sold to Singapore, people will look at it again.
The National Party's housing spokesperson Judith Collins says reality is starting to hit.
What the government has finally worked out after 8 months is that their foreign buyer ban for apartments and apartment blocks and new apartments has absolutely stuffed the market, and they're finally retreating from their position. If only they'd listened to us. We told them it would happen, and so did the industry.
The Foreign Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters says any law is better than the complete absence of any foreign buyer restrictions under the national-led government.
Of course it's not weak. It's the strongest thing you've seen for a whole long time, and perhaps for 3 decades. That's why it's important.
When the bill came before Select Committee, a number of problems were identified. One change the government has agreed to is to help overseas corporates avoid getting caught up in the ban, for example, when they want to buy residential land for something like a new cell phone tower. Another relates to the possible impact on housing supply if large-scale developers are unable to sell off-the-plan apartments to overseas buyers. The Trade Minister David Parker says that's a valid concern.
The advice that we had from officials was that if we didn't allow investment in apartment buildings, then the whole complex was more likely not to proceed, and so there would be fewer purchase choices for New Zealanders.
Winston Peters says the changes won't result in a softer policy, but rather a smarter one.
Well, it's a very sound policy because it allows us to engage in the investment potential of other countries whilst getting the same outcome for New Zealanders. That is, far more affordable homes for New Zealanders.
Housing strategist Leonie Freeman says the proposed changes will give greater certainty to apartment developers. She says some developments have been put on hold pending more information about the government's plans, and pre-selling apartments is crucial to getting them off the ground.
If you can't get pre-sales, a significant amount of pre-sales, so the bank are confident they won't lend the funding, and that's been the problem, particularly in the last 8 or 9 months.
Nick Goodall from property information company CoreLogic sees the impact of foreign buyers is more of a perception issue than reality, and the changes may not actually have a major impact on the market.
There potentially has been larger foreign investment in the past. I do think that this is more one that just, feels right to a lot of people because they say, well, we should be selling land to people that live here. And so I think it's more of a people pleaser as opposed to something that's actually going to change the market and change prices.
The latest official figures show nationally 3% of people who bought residential property in the last quarter didn't hold New Zealand citizenship or resident visas. However, that figure was higher in Auckland and Queenstown. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
An independent investigation into Football Ferns coach Andreas Heraf is imminent after formal complaints from several players. This morning, New Zealand Football confirmed they'd received a letter from the New Zealand Professional Footballers Association containing official complaints from a group of players. The national body says they're reviewing the concerns, which are understood to outline significant issues within the team environment, as a matter of priority. And this afternoon, the Professional Players Association Chief Executive Harry Ngata told our sports reporter Clay Wilson what they expect to happen next.
We would like an independent review done on the Football Ferns, on the high performance piece around the Ferns, really. So that's our, first and foremost, that's what we're requesting. And I have to say, Clay, it's been, I suppose, a really challenging time and difficult time for the girls in terms of documenting those feelings and those thoughts. It's very, I suppose, a lot of courage to come forward and address those issues. And we're hoping that obviously with New Zealand Football we can address their concerns, and that's where we're hoping to get some resolution around around the review, and then obviously what that review will entail, recommendations, etc. will be part of the framework that will be built to have a conclusion, I suppose.
What can you tell me about what these complaints involve in terms of the team and what the players' concerns are?
Look, I suppose there was some chatter and some noise previously around from the tour from Spain, and Abby was obviously a person that's obviously no longer with the team, but it was an integral part of the team, and she voiced her concerns and has done over the last week or so as well around the environment, and those were some of the issues that that we've addressed with New Zealand football around the environment, and I suppose there are a number of statements, I suppose, and I can't disclose the detail, but there were some pretty unhappy women in and around the what they feel would be really difficult to perform in that type of environment, particularly at an elite level. So that's what we've asked New Zealand football to address, and that's what we'll work through with them over the next sort of 24, 48 hours, I hope.
From your knowledge, how far do these concerns go back?
Well, I think how far back do you go? I think obviously the tour in Asia and Thailand went well. They got a couple of good results. I think it was Andreas's first sort of exposure to the football ferns, and then obviously Spain. The results weren't great. Really disappointing considering what they achieved in Thailand. But also, I suppose, the girls were really looking forward to, and then with all due respect to Tony Reddings, and Tony's done some awesome stuff with the Ferns over the last sort of 8 or 9 years. I think he's been involved. But the girls were ready for a change, new voice, new direction, a lot of new young players coming through with mixed with some players in there that are 100+ caps for their country. So a mix of real experience and a lot of good youth coming through. So felt that, potentially there would be some room for change and a different direction. And they saw that with Andreas's first, I suppose, influence in Thailand, and then obviously the difficult results in Spain. And then obviously we've just seen the game against Japan just over a week ago now. And as subsequent to that, there's been a number of concerns from players, which we've obviously sent through to New Zealand football. So, it's difficult, Clay, it really is. But I think the first and foremost that the players have, put their hands up now and said, look, this is, here are some feedback, here are some concerns we have around the football firm squad. We'd like it to have it reviewed. So that's I suppose where we're at today.
Were these complaints officially being made a case of there being a group of players as opposed to one player?
There were a group. There were a group that came forward. Yeah, and I sent those on to the board and to New Zealand football on Monday. So there was a group of girls that came forward and were willing to put pen to paper and voice their concerns and ask that their concerns be heard from the parent body. And like I said, I understand NZF are looking at those now across today and tomorrow, and I'll liaise and continue to liaise with Andy Martin and NZF around the next steps.
If an independent investigation does go ahead as you guys hope, what about Andreas's roles in the meantime? He obviously has 2 roles with New Zealand football.
Yeah.
Would you expect that he stays in those roles in any capacity, or that for the duration of the investigation that...
Well, I think it's an employment issue right now. I think whether... and he is wearing 2 hats, isn't he? He's the coach, the head coach of the football Ferns, and he's the technical director. So, I suppose there's some crossover there in terms of his roles and responsibilities. But that was a process that I think he some extensive sort of, I suppose, preparation around how that looked from a New Zealand football perspective and around his job description and the different things he'd be involved with. And whether he continues in the capacity right now while this process is happening, I'm not sure. So again, I'm waiting for to discuss that with New Zealand football in the meantime.
And that's the New Zealand Professional Footballers Association Chief Executive Harry Ngata there, speaking to Clay Wilson about their desire for an independent investigation into the Football Ferns coach Andreas Heraf. Well, a Waikato boy has had a lucky escape after he was swept up into the air by a tornado on his way home from school yesterday. 13-year-old George Jeffrey from Matamata Intermediate's recovering from grazes to one side of his body after the twister lifted him into the air and dumped him into gravel, narrowly missing a power pole. George told me he'd heard about tornadoes but never thought he'd actually get caught up in one.
I was just walking home and then I just get whipped across the legs with leaves, and then I just see my friend just run behind the house, and then I just turn around and then I just get picked up by the tornado and just thrown backwards.
Wow, and how long did that last for?
Maybe about 30 seconds.
And what were you thinking? Were you up in the air? Can you remember what you were thinking when you were up in the air like that?
I was just screaming.
And then what happened?
When I hit the ground, I just got off as fast as I could and just ran behind the nearest house.
And were you hurt?
Yeah, I grazed all up the left side of my body.
Gosh, and what did you think when, in the sort of immediately after that had happened? Was it sort of still again?
It just went back to normal. It just went back to sunny.
And so you're sitting there, you've been up in the air, now you're on the ground and you're all grazed.
Yeah.
What were you thinking right then?
I was just scared, and then I was just real scared.
And did you find your friend?
Yeah, he was behind the house. He just told me to come behind.
And so how long did you wait behind the house for?
Maybe 10 seconds.
And what did you do next?
I just stayed there, and then one of my mum's ex-bosses came and helped me, and the workers around and the person from the house.
Had they seen what had happened, George?
Yeah.
So what did they describe what it looked like to you?
They said that there was a trampoline that went over top of me, and I went 2 meters in the air.
Oh my goodness. And so then what happened when you got home? What did your mum say?
She was just saying what an unusual thing had happened, and then she just bandaged me up.
Hey George, can I talk to your mum?
Yeah. Hi, I'm here.
I'm just wondering what you thought when, was it George that told you or one of the guys that had helped him? I'm wondering what you thought when you heard about what had happened.
Yeah, well, I was, George is on his way home from school. He usually walks home because we're not far from the intermediate. We're only a block over. And I was at a friend's place, which is a block over from where we live. And it was my ex-boss, Pam Gerard, actually. She rang me and she said, "Oh, Linda, George has been lifted up by a tornado." And I said, "What tornado?" Like, I was oblivious to that we had a storm or a wind or anything. And she said, "He's been lifted up and he's hurt himself." She said, "I've picked him up and I'll take him home." She said, "I'll meet you at home." So when I got home here, George was already in their house and he was in quite a shocking state and crying and whatnot. And I said to Pam, "What happened?" She said, it was just unbelievable. She said she saw him just been lifted up by the wind and thrown. And she said she was driving down the road and she said all she saw was this trampoline heading towards his way, thinking, "God, I hope it's not going to hit him." And apparently the trampoline, I think it went right down Farmers Road. It kept travelling, actually. And she said he was grazed and whatnot. And I came inside and, yeah, he was pretty upset and in shock sort of thing. And this morning I took him to school and there's some linemen at the same corner at that time. And they were helping George as well. And I said to these guys this morning, I said, "Oh, were you the same fellas that were in the tornado yesterday?" And they said, "Oh, is this your son?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, it was unbelievable to watch. They said they just seen him lifted up, same sort of story that Pam said. And then they said that they heard a crack and a bang. Apparently the fence and a big branch, which was half a tree, had broken off on the other side and hit a car. the fence came down, and they said their truck was on the road as well, which wiped their mirrors into the truck. And, they said it was just unbelievable to watch. She said it would just happen so quick, and then it was gone so quick. So,
gosh, and Linda, had he sort of come back down where he'd been lifted off, or had he been moved along at all?
I think by the sound of it, he's moved along because he scraped himself all down one side, and he said that he nearly hit a power pole as well. So he wasn't. Yeah, I think that's lifted him up and then taken him. I don't know how far, but he's scraped himself down the concrete. You know, when they get that horrible gravel rash.
Gosh,
so
he's so unlucky. It's such an unlikely thing to happen, but in some ways he's very lucky in that it could have been much worse.
Very lucky. Yeah, and as I said, both sort of sides of him, a fence has come down, and then this tree's cracked and had a car sort of on either side of the property where he was. So it's he was very lucky by the sound of it. Yeah.
How have you been feeling since you heard about all this?
Yeah, it's sort of a bit daunting to try and understand what happened, but you know, the state he was in, he was really upset, and I sort of realised, like I was trying to say to George before, to say we were sitting on the couch after everything had happened. Just a couple of hours later, and the wind got up again, and it was still light. And just the look on George's face, and you know, he sort of went a bit pale, and to think, oh God, here comes the wind again, you know. So yeah, I think he was in shock. Yeah.
And that's Linda Burton, who I was talking to there, the mother of George Jeffrey, the Matamata schoolboy picked up by a tornado yesterday. Well, coming up here on Checkpoint, the Director General of Security, Rebecca Kitteridge, launches an investigation into the conduct of its own staff in relation to apparent favourable bias shown towards Thompson and Clark. We'll have more on this developing story. The US President Donald Trump says America will not be a migrant camp. And nurses call not just for better pay, but for better working conditions. We'd love your feedback. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, Checkpoint with John Campbell, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Right now, Katrina Batten is here with the headlines.
The Security Intelligence Service has launched an internal investigation into its dealings with Thompson and Clark. The Director General, Rebecca Kitteridge, says she's worried about her staff's professionalism and whether they were biased towards the controversial security firm. And the State Services Commissioner will now investigate all government agencies' use of Thompson and Clark. Peter Hughes says there is evidence of serious staff misconduct. The inquiry began after it was revealed the firm spied on Canterbury earthquake claimants for Southern Response. It was further widened to include the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, which had been spying on Greenpeace staff. The National Party says the government is backpedalling on its foreign house buyer ban, and it's realised the negative impact it's having on the market. Overseas buyers purchasing apartments off the plan from large-scale developers and Singaporean purchasers will now be exempt. The exemption for Singapore is a result of months of negotiations. The government says no more money is available to increase nurses' pay, and district health boards and the nurses' union need to work out how to allocate the $500 million package on offer. Nurses are preparing to strike next month if they can't reach a last-ditch agreement with DHBs about pay and working conditions. Hayden Poulter, who was known as the country's first serial killer, has been released from a more than 10-year stretch in prison. He's on parole after serving time for the 1996 murder of a massage parlour owner and 2 prostitutes, as well as rape and attempted murder. Poulter is regarded as a moderate risk of reoffending and will be monitored by GPS for the next 5 years. The Kapiti Coast District Councillor David Scott has been convicted and fined $1,500 for indecently assaulting a council employee. Scott, who's 71, was accused of rubbing his genitals against the woman during a council morning tea in April last year. He's also been given a first warning under the 3 strikes law. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
And thank you very much, Katrina. It's time for business now with Matt Chatterton. And there's a study out, Matt, that says new property taxes would improve New Zealand ownership numbers. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, hi Rowan. Yeah, this study comes from Westpac. It's looking at 6 possible changes to the tax system. such as a capital gains tax, property or land tax. If, for example, there was a 10% capital gains tax, a 1% land tax, or just a 0.5% property tax, that could result in house prices falling by around 10 or 11%. There's also an option of taxing landlords on an assumed rate of return of around 5%, which could see properties fall up to 20%. This, of course, would sort of equalise the tax advantage. It would lower the attractiveness of property investors by dropping competition and therefore helping first home buyers get into the property market. Yeah, it's really a political question. You know, should property investors enjoy the tax breaks compared to those who don't? Those are new homeowners or people who don't own homes at all.
And Matt, apparently New Zealand businesses risk becoming zombie firms. So what's a zombie firm and why are they at risk?
Yeah, so this research conducted by insurance body Suncorp found that 3/4 of businesses are confident about handling future disruption, but 57% have no plans to change their products and services to address it over the next 5 years. These disruptions are things such as natural disasters, staffing problems and changes implemented by the government. There's also technological changes, which was ranked 4th in what businesses consider to be the main disruptions they could face in the next 5 years. I actually spoke to independent economist Campbell earlier today, who reviewed the survey. He said businesses must embrace these threats such as technology rather than ignore them, which according to the survey is what they plan on doing. Otherwise they risk becoming zombie firms, which in other words is they are bound to fail if they don't embrace it. Bagri noted that around 60% of businesses were embracing these threats. It was the other lot that are the greatest risk.
And Matt, just finally, what have the markets been doing today?
Yeah, so the top 50 index closed down 111 points to 8863. That's a 1% drop. The New Zealand dollar is up on the American slightly to 69.3 US cents and is up to around 93.7 Australian cents.
Thanks very much. That's Matt Chatterton there with Business. And to the United States now, where the President Donald Trump says America will not be a migrant camp. Under fire for his zero tolerance policy, Mr. Trump's gone on the attack. He's accused the Democrats of obstructing his efforts to reform immigration law. In recent weeks, up to 2,000 children have been separated from their parents who have entered the US illegally from Mexico. Here's the BBC's Nick Bryant with the latest developments.
Children held in what look like cages. The Trump administration's zero-tolerance immigration policy being put into action at this detention centre in Texas. It's not just the much-vaunted border wall that the administration hopes will act as a deterrent to those who cross the Mexican border illegally, but also this wire mesh fencing. La Perrera, the detainees are calling it, the dog kennel. And in these dusty facilities, the Trump administration isn't just detaining children, but separating them from their parents. Nearly 2,000 sons and daughters have been taken away from their mothers and fathers in just over a month-long period. Edilberto Garcia was separated from his teenage son.
It was hard, the hardest day for me. I felt like I was losing my son. That's what I thought. I was going to lose my son.
A photo of a 2-year-old Honduran girl crying as US Border Patrol agents searched her mother has crystallised concerns and complaints. They've come from the former First Lady Laura Bush, who said this zero-tolerance policy is cruel, it's immoral and it breaks my heart. And remarkably, the present First Lady's office also issued a statement. Mrs. Trump hates to see children separated from their families. She believes we need to be a country that follows all laws, but also a country that governs with heart. But her husband's hardline stance on immigration was a key reason why he now occupies the White House, and he defended the crackdown.
The United States will not be a migrant camp, and it will not be a refugee-holding facility. Won't be. You look at what's happening in Europe, you look at what's happening in other places, we can't allow that to happen to the United States, not on my watch.
In a series of tweets that will place even further strain on the transatlantic alliance, Donald Trump has taken aim at Angela Merkel's Germany, claiming the influx of immigrants has caused political instability and a spike in crime. That last claim is false. The German crime rate is at its lowest in 30 years. Critics of the president claim he was trying to distract attention from what's happening in these detention centres. He's also been accused of using the detained children as bargaining chips to get congressional funding from Democrats for the border wall.
The zero tolerance policy means zero humanity, and it makes zero sense.
These are some of the most searing images of the Trump presidency so far. And we've heard some of the most searing sounds. Released by a US news organisation and said to be audio of children crying who've been separated from their parents. This policy is intended to protect American borders, but is it demolishing American ideals?
Nick Bryant reporting there, and the United Nations has also weighed in on the debate, describing what's happening on the US border as unconscionable and urging the US to end its zero tolerance policy immediately. Well, homeowners may end up paying thousands more for insurance premiums than the house next door, as insurance firms increasingly use technology that assesses an individual property's risk. Risk-prone parts of the country, like Wellington, are starting to feel the effects of the higher rates. One couple in Karori, covered by Tower Insurance, has had their premiums increased by 300% to just over $7,000. Emma Hatton reports.
Karori couple Ursula and Greg Egan were stunned to find the premium for their house insurance had soared from just over $2,000 to $7,000 a year. But Mrs Egan says their neighbour's house had only gone up by $1,000.
I went on to, because Tower does an online quote, so I put all my details in and their addresses for my neighbours, and the premiums came out at around $3,000. There's no, that I know of, geological reason why our premium would be 3 times what theirs are.
A spokesperson for Tower says it uses leading earthquake data software to determine the exact location of a property, its proximity to the fault line, and what the house is built on or out of. They say it's entirely logical that 2 neighbours can have hugely different risk profiles and therefore insurance costs. Richard Deakin, the insurance director for property information and analytics firm CoreLogic, says in the face of rising premiums, underinsurance is a real risk. He says people may estimate their home's value to be lower than it actually is, or not insure at all.
It's a sad fact of life now that I have to nominate a sum insured value for my property, which is my estimate of how much it will cost to rebuild my house should the worst happen. But if I haven't covered myself adequately, then there is a risk of myself being underinsured. And if we are then hit by a major event, if I'm significantly underinsured, I might actually not be able to afford to build at all.
He says if this happens, there's no backup plan.
The government doesn't have an obligation to step in. They could decide to if they decided the event and the underinsurance was of a significant nature that it was going to have a negative impact on society. Potentially they may feel an obligation to step in, but they don't have a legal obligation.
Massey University insurance expert Michael Naylor says a 300% increase is probably over the top. He says insurance companies are worried about underpricing Wellington properties in case a major earthquake hits.
What happened prior to Christchurch is the companies underpriced because they weren't expecting a problem within the next 2 or 3 decades. A few of the major Australian firms came quite close to bankruptcy with Christchurch and are keen not to suffer that again.
Dr Naylor says in Palmerston North, the local council is taking steps to plan for natural disasters and climate change.
In Palmerston North, the council has scoped the land, so they know which is the good land, which is the bad land, which is the old river beds, which is a swamp. And you can start to see that the effects will be here. And maybe you start to move towns.
He says the government needs to undertake similar research nationwide, so it will be better prepared for severe events. The Insurance Council says insurers actively engage with central and local government and other stakeholders to raise awareness of natural hazards and promote New Zealand's resilience. They say homeowners need to make sure their cover is adequate. For Checkpoint, Emma Hatton.
With no time for toilet breaks or a cup of tea, let alone a lunch hour, nurses rushed off their feet say it's a struggle to make it through their shifts. Thousands of nurses are preparing to walk off the job next month if they can't reach an agreement with DHBs about pay. But some say the fight for better conditions is just as important as their pay packet. Nita Blake-Person reports.
It was another 11-hour day for the Southern DHB nurse yesterday. The woman, who didn't want to be identified, started before 7 a.m. and didn't leave until 6 p.m, despite only being rostered on until 3.
We had 3 patients who were on one-to-one nursing status, so they had to have someone with them the entire time, right by them, within reach. One was an admission that was sort of in the middle of the shift, and really, really very unwell person. Yeah, we had a bunch of student nurses that we were mentoring as well. It was just a very, very busy shift.
The nurse works at least 10 hours of overtime each week and says nurses are racing every minute of the day.
The fact that I had not had a lunch break at all, let alone a tea break, and let alone any time to go to the toilet, that's common.
Nurses describe the same problems across the country. Canterbury DHB nurse Celeste says she's working in an understaffed ward in dangerous conditions.
Staff have been obviously assaulted and have had to go to ED for these assaults, which have happened from patients, and then of course the patients missing out, and there's been patients that have ended up hurting themselves or possibly close to ending their life because staff haven't been able to effectively get round to check on patients as quickly as they would if we had the staff that may have been sent away for other incidents.
She says nurses are at breaking point.
We deal with a lot of violent and intoxicated, under the influence patients, and we have no control on sort of what we can do or how to manage it. A lot of nurses and my colleagues, friends I work with, feel we're losing experienced staff because they're fearful, they're really anxious about coming to work, and some staff don't even come to work anymore, they just ring in sick.
Another Canterbury nurse, Josie Butler, says wage rises are needed to boost staffing numbers, and she wants to see a minimum 20% increase.
Some people might think that sounds like a lot of money, but at the moment, if I went over to Australia right now, I could earn at the very least $10 more an hour immediately for the exact same job. And with that kind of thing happening, we're just losing so many nurses because they don't feel valued and they can go get a far better deal overseas.
All the nurses spoken to by RNZ agree the $500 million offer from DHBs, which includes an increase of 500 full-time nurses and pay rises of up to 15%, doesn't go far enough. But the Health Minister David Clark says while there's still room for negotiations, he's adamant there won't be any more money.
The nurses can come back and let us know if they could cut this a different way, if it's a way that works better with their members. We've been clear that we have listened to them. They have concerns about safety on the wards. One of the things we want to do is make sure that there are more nurses because we hear that the situation they're working in has been pressured for a long time.
The Nurses Union is balloting its members about what their specific concerns are with the latest DHB offer, and will put that feedback to DHBs next week. In the meantime, 2 proposed 24-hour strikes scheduled for the 5th and 12th of July are still on the table. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Nita Blakeperson, aho.
The expansion of a controversial water bottling plant near Whakatane is splitting the local community. Earlier this month, the government granted consent for Cresswell New Zealand, which is owned by Chinese water bottling company Ngongu, to buy land to expand its operations at the Otakere Springs water bottling plant. And the Bay of Plenty Regional Council and the Whakatane District Council granted resource consent for the project. Now, one local group's getting ready to appeal to the Environment Court, while another's looking at how it can work alongside Cresswell to give more jobs to locals. Te Manu Kōrehi reporter John Boynton has more.
The Otakere Save Our Water and Environment Group first formed last year, after Cresswell New Zealand announced it wanted to undertake a $42.5 million expansion of its current operation. The group's spokesperson Maureen Fraser says news that it was to become a reality came as a shock.
We were definitely disappointed. There's not too many other words to describe it. There's definitely been anger, but a lot of people are surprised.
Surprised, Maureen Fraser says the regional and district councils haven't fully considered the impacts on the local community and environment and seem to lack knowledge about the aquifer where the water's been taken from. The group is schooling itself on how the Environment Court works and has set up a Give a Little page to help fund the appeal.
Obviously, we only had 15 days from the time the announcement was made. So we are a community group. We are very green in terms of not knowing how the Environment Court works and those proceedings.
But Kokohino Marae Papakanga Development Chairman Hemana Eruera believes the expansion of the water bottling plant is a positive for the small community of Te Teko.
Well, we're quite happy because we supported it on the offset at the hearing based on seeking employment for our people.
Te Teko has long struggled with high unemployment, and Mr Eruera says the projected 60 jobs will be a major economic boost. Kokohino Marae is currently developing a papakanga for 20 whānau members, and Mr Eruera hopes those that come home will find jobs with Creswell. In their resource consent decision, the commissioners noted there was strong support for the applications among the Māori community. But the Māori environmental advocate Raewyn Bennett says the fact some Māori support the expansion is not a reason to ignore wider cultural issues.
So for the water space, you have to have Māori in that decision-making role, not councils by themselves, not government by themselves. Māori have to be there.
The company wants to take up to 5,000 cubic metres of groundwater per day, or almost 1.1 million cubic metres per year for the commercial bottling of water. Raewyn Bennett says shipping New Zealand water off overseas is sending a terrible message to our mokopuna.
What's that really saying? And I think there's been too much chipping away at our culture, how it demeans our identity, undermines our values, and I'm really concerned about what we're handing to the next generation.
Creswell New Zealand Director Michael Gleisner wasn't available for comment today. Mo te hōtaka o te ahipo nei ko John Boynton aho.
Public transport users will finally be able to jump aboard ferries, trains and buses nationwide with the swipe of a card or a mobile phone from 2021. A working group made up of regional councils and the Transport Agency is set to roll out the integrated ticketing system in 3 years' time in Wellington, with other regions to follow. Jonathan Mitchell reports.
The plan is to develop a universal non-cash payment method that commuters can use on buses, trains and ferries around New Zealand. Wayne Hastie from the Wellington Regional Council, who's chairing the working group, says there are about 16 different types of ticketing systems in New Zealand, and that doesn't make sense.
Well, I think it's too many. It's inefficient. It means that you've got, if you travel to different areas, you'll have to have different cards to be able to pay. Some of them, like in Wellington, we're still using paper tickets on rail, which is really a pretty outdated mode of payment.
Current systems and cards such as Auckland's HOP and Wellington's Snapper cards will disappear, making way for one that allows payment by credit card, mobile phone or a transport card. A spokesperson for the Wellington-based lobby group Public Transport Voice, Paula Warren, says it's well overdue.
Very late. NZTA did a pilot in Auckland years ago that identified Thales as the preferred user, and that was supposed to flow on to cities like Wellington, and it never did.
And these Wellington commuters say after years of delays, a nationwide cashless system for public transport can't come soon enough.
It's a good idea, and that makes time and money, because otherwise, get one from here, get one from here. So to get one thing, do one time, it looks me good and useful. I will use it, and with my children, with my family. Yes.
Yeah, if they could load it onto a card or something, that would be far easier to use. And if it's linked to your details, then there's no issues if you lose it. You can just get the card replaced rather than buying a new ticket.
Paula Warren says the replacement system needs to be fair and reward public transport use.
I think it's important to think about how the fares are organised. We need a fare system, which means that if you use the services frequently, you're not penalised, you're actually rewarded for that. And so systems with caps, for example, so that once you've used your card a certain number of times, which is how Christchurch was operating, that after that you don't pay for public transport for the rest of the week or the month, is a really good idea.
But Wayne Hastie says it may not be cheaper to get around.
It'll make it easier rather than necessarily cheaper. So under the system, each region will still be able to set its own fares for public transport travel, but it'll be just a more consistent payment approach.
The new integrated ticketing is expected to be rolled out in Wellington in 2021, with the rest of the country to follow later. That'll be more than 3 decades after Hong Kong began using the cashless octopus card, and about 2 decades since the Oyster card was introduced in London. Better late than never. For Checkpoint, call Jonathan Mitchell, Tēnei.
And we are hoping to speak very shortly to the State Services Minister, Chris Hipkins, about the story that's been breaking in the last hour or so about a State Intelligence Services staff member who appears to have helped Thompson and Clark secure government department contracts. In the meantime, we would love your feedback, so please do get in touch about this story or any others. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. You can Facebook us, Checkpoint with John Campbell, or you can email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. We hope that we've actually been trying to speak to the SIS Minister, Andrew Little. He's not available, but we are hoping to speak very shortly to the State Services Minister, Chris Hipkins. And before we go, if you have been wondering where John Campbell is today, here he is now.
I'm in Te Aureri a Te Tonga, which is a youth justice residence on the outskirts of Palmerston North. In here are children aged between 14 and 17 who have committed crimes ranging from repeated car thefts, high-speed chases, the kind of stuff we've heard so much about in the news lately, through to much more serious crimes, including really serious assaults and possibly even worse. How do children end up committing crimes like that? How do they end up in a place like this? And what does a place like this do to try and get those children back? 14 to 17 years old, serious offenders, some of them, most of them from very tough environments. Almost every single child in here with some form of gang affiliation, either directly or through their parents. Almost every single child in here from homes which involve drugs, violence, all of the above. How do we save these children?
Very much for that, John. And we are still hoping to get Chris Hipkins, the State Services Minister. He'll be on, in fact, he will be on after 6 o'clock tonight. In the meantime, a professional theatre collective in Christchurch says a decision to show them the door is brutal and unfair. Free Theatre's been running experimental theatre productions out of the Gym, a performing arts centre in Christchurch's revamped arts centre. The country's longest running producer of experimental theatre leased the space on a rolling basis, and despite some funding challenges, believed it had come to an arrangement with the centre's previous chief executive. Now it says it's been kicked out by the centre's new management, dealing a blow to the local arts scene. Logan Church reports.
Free Theatre actor and producer George Parker is now packing up the place that he has poured his heart and soul into for years. The small professional theatre company moved into the Arts Centre's old gymnasium after it reopened in September 2014. Following the completion of earthquake repairs. But now it is being told to leave.
The rig, the lights, the sound, the blacks, everything that makes it a theatre, we've put in a bar, and we've been given essentially 20 working days to get rid of all of that, or find places to put that, or find a new place to go, which for a small organisation like ours is pretty tough. Of course, it's totally legal, 20 working days is part of the lease, but it's pretty brutal.
The company was struggling to meet the cost of renting the space. George Parker says they were thousands of dollars short. But he says he and the Arts Centre's previous chief executive, Andre Lovett, were working on a new arrangement. But after Mr Lovett resigned at the end of last year, that plan went out the window.
We were discussing with the Arts Centre a new partnership, which we actually really liked, where the Arts Centre would take over our hires, we would do our program, we would pay for what we did at the time, and so we felt it was really good. There was one stipulation that was really challenging for us, which we had to go away and find a way to do that, but in the meantime the board decided that they would terminate the lease.
In an effort to change the Arts Centre's mind, Free Theatre has penned a letter that's been signed by more than 200 members of Christchurch's arts community. That letter was sent this afternoon. The Arts Centre declined to be interviewed, instead saying in a statement the Free Theatre hasn't been keeping up with lease payments and it had no choice.
The Free Theatre Trust has not been able to meet its commitments to the Arts Centre for some time, which the Arts Centre can no longer sustain.
We have worked closely with the Free Theatre Trust for several months now, trying to find a solution in a partnership arrangement, and have offered several concessions. It is therefore with regret that we have had to end their lease and ask them to remove their shackles.
Christchurch Central MP Duncan Webb wants the Free Theatre and the Arts Centre to meet as soon as possible to talk through the situation.
The Free Theatre has asked that we have some discussions, and the Arts Centre has said that they're happy to have some discussions, so that's really great because, I mean, both the Arts Centre and the Free Theatre are absolutely important parts of what goes on in the central city, and we need to make sure we look after both of those parties.
But George Parker says the issue is bigger than the Free Theatre and the Arts Centre. He says if small arts groups aren't supported, the whole city stands to lose out.
This city has, I guess, the chance to do things differently, and we keep on saying it, but if we just go back to the old ways of doing things, then we've lost a massive opportunity. And if they don't take the time to think these things through with people that know what they're talking about, then we will just have the same old monocultural Christchurch. Yeah, it'll be sad.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. An OIA request from RNZ News has triggered the uncovering of what the Ministry for Primary Industries describes as potentially serious misconduct by several former staff members. The request was for all correspondence the Ministry received from the controversial private investigators Thompson and Clark for the past 8 years. The reply comes as the State Services Commissioner Peter Hughes has widened an inquiry into the security firm to all government agencies. The Ministry for Primary Industry says the misconduct was uncovered in the course of responding to RNZ's request, and the matter has now been handed to the State Services Commission. A ministry spokesperson says RNZ's original request will be responded to in a fortnight, close to 3 months after it was lodged. The misconduct is said to have happened several years ago. Meanwhile, a Security Intelligence Service staff member appears to have helped Thompson and Clark secure contracts with government departments. Emails released to Checkpoint under the Official Information Act show the SIS staff member, who's an old friend of Thompson and Clark, put the firm in touch with the Justice and Health Ministries to book contracts. The SIS staff member also tried to help the firm attend a security event it had not RSVP'd to in time and met with it over beers to discuss SIS work. The SIS has launched an internal investigation into these dealings, saying it could show bias towards the firm. The minister responsible for the SIS, Andrew Little, says he's been briefed on that investigation. The National Party says the government is backpedalling on its foreign house buyer ban as it's realised the negative impact it's having on the market. Overseas buyers purchasing apartments off the plan from large-scale developers and Singaporean purchasers will now be exempt. The exemption for Singapore is a result of months of negotiations. National's housing spokesperson Judith Collins says reality is starting to hit.
What the government has finally worked out after 8 months is that their foreign buyer ban for apartments and apartment blocks and new apartments has absolutely stuffed the market, and they're finally retreating from their position. If only they'd listened to us. We told them it would happen, and so did the industry.
Judith Collins. The government says any law is better than the complete absence of foreign buyer restrictions under National. The Commerce Commission has unveiled a set of potential law changes to crack down on overseas criminals misusing New Zealand companies. Chris Farfoy says the goal is to curb money laundering and the ability of overseas-based criminals to use this country's well-regarded companies register to conceal some of their business. The police estimate that $1.35 billion worth of proceeds from fraud and illegal drug trafficking is laundered through corporate entities in New Zealand. Mr Farfoy has released a discussion document and he expects feedback to come from interested parties through until August.
Some of the legislation changes that might come about as part of this review is pretty key to make sure those people know that, yes, we're toughening up the legislation, but we're also keeping a much more vigilant eye on some of the behaviour.
Chris Farfoy. The American President Donald Trump has threatened China with more tariffs, raising the prospect of an all-out trade war. Mr Trump says he'll impose a 10% tariff on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. He says it's in retaliation over China's decision to raise tariffs on $50 billion on US goods, which came after Mr Trump announced similar tariffs on Chinese goods last week. Mr Trump says his new threatened tariffs will go into effect if China refused to change its practices. A new study of small weapons estimates there are over 1 billion firearms, both legal and illicit, in the world today. The figure is significantly higher than in the last study in 2007. According to the Small Arms Survey, civilian gun ownership in the United States is the biggest contributing factor. The lead author, Aaron Karp, says it's all about the regulatory environment.
It all depends upon the law and the culture. In the UK, for example, no one's buying handguns because you can't. It's illegal. In the United States, it's extremely easy, and people are buying pistols. In the United States, civilians are buying about 14 million new firearms every year.
Aaron Karp says globally, the typical gun owner is a white, middle-aged male. The government has announced it intends to close Hato Pētera College on Auckland's North Shore. The decision follows months of concern about the Māori Catholic school's finances and low student numbers. It currently has 5 students. Te Anewa Hurihanganui reports.
The school's supporters have 28 days to respond before the government makes its final decision. Hato Pētera, the only Māori Catholic co-ed school in the country, closed its boarding facilities in 2015 and student numbers have plummeted as a result. The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, says despite efforts from whānau, staff and the school's commissioner, concerns over the school's finances, human resourcing and low student numbers remain. The future of the college is expected to be finally decided by the end of July. Ko te aniwa, Hurihanganui ahau.
It's 6:05. Sport and independent review into a player revolt among the football ferns will begin tomorrow. It follows controversial comments by the coach of the New Zealand women's team, Andreas Heraf, about their recent 3-1 loss to Japan, as well as problems during a recent tour to Spain. New Zealand Football confirmed this morning they've received a letter outlining complaints from a number of players. The chief executive of the Players Association, Harry Nata, says they're clear on what should happen next.
We would like a review, an independent review done. First and foremost, that's what we're requesting. And I have to say, it's been a really challenging time for the girls in terms of documenting those feelings and those thoughts. I suppose a lot of courage to come forward and address those issues, and we're hoping to get some resolution around the review and then what that review will entail.
Harry Ngata. The former All Black swinger Julian Savea is making no bones about it. The lure of the French franc is behind his decision to leave New Zealand rugby. Savea is joining French club Toulon on a 2-year deal and will leave at the end of the Super Rugby competition. The 27-year-old has played 54 tests for the All Blacks but has fallen out of favour, with his last test being against the British and Irish Lions last year. He's played 87 games for the Hurricanes and says heading overseas was his only option, as he couldn't see himself playing for another Super Rugby side.
No disrespect to all the other teams, but hell no. I love this team, and it's always been a dream of mine to be here, and this yellow jersey honestly means a lot to me, and it's probably the one jersey I'm going to miss the most.
Julian Savea. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Nick Bollinger samples the latest from Lily Allen. Alison Balance chairs a discussion on the future of the world's oceans, part of the Waka celebration at this year's International Festival. And Lewis Schipper has the dirt on methane, or how we could use the soil to remove the methane from the atmosphere.
And stay informed at the other end of the day. Join me for Lately, an hour-long show that includes the extended 10 p.m. news bulletin and is across music, the arts, politics, live events and current affairs. Keep up to date with Lately with Karen Hay, 10 to 11 weeknights on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, a few showers today, rain tomorrow with heavy falls and possible thundery downpours. Auckland, Coromandel and northern Waikato. Cloudy periods and a few showers today, periods of rain or showers tomorrow, mainly in the north. For the remainder of Waikato through to Kapiti, including Bay of Plenty and the central high country, fine spells and a few showers today, mainly fine tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington. Cloudy periods and a few showers clearing Wellington tomorrow morning. Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, cloudy at times with a few showers, mainly about the coast. For Nelson Buller, Westland and Fiordland, the place to be, fine. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with a few showers. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. A state intelligence services staff member appears to have helped Thompson and Clark secure contracts with government departments. Emails released to Checkpoint under the Official Information Act show the SIS staff member, who's an old friend of Thompson and Clark's directors, put the firm in touch with the Justice and Health Ministries to book contracts. The documents show the SIS staff member, whose name is redacted, also tried to help the firm attend a security event that they'd not RSVP'd to in time, and met Thompson and Clark director over beers to discuss SIS work. The SIS has launched an internal investigation into these dealings, saying it could show bias towards Thompson and Clark. The Director General of the SIS, Rebecca Kitteridge, was not available for an interview. The SIS Minister, Andrew Little, would not be interviewed, but in a statement said he'd been briefed and was confident the Director General of Security would conduct a thorough internal investigation. The State Services Minister is Chris Hipkins, and in the last few minutes he spoke to our reporter Zach Fleming.
I think what's become clear through the investigation so far is that Thompson and Clark have had a much wider relationship with public sector agencies and departments than we were previously aware of. And as such, I think it's important that we get to the bottom of that, the nature of the relationship, whether there's anything in there that's inappropriate or worse than inappropriate. It's really important that that's looked at very thoroughly, and that's now going to happen.
On the face of it, does it look like this behaviour, these relationships are acceptable?
Well, it certainly looks like the relationship has been inappropriate. The coziness of the relationship between Thompson and Clark and some parts of the public service is concerning, and that is one of the things that the investigation is going to get to the bottom of.
Have you spoken to the Prime Minister about this?
I haven't spoken to the Prime Minister directly about this today, but we've had conversations about this in the past. She's made it very, very clear that she expects New Zealand public services to act with the highest levels of integrity, and that some of the allegations to date are very concerning, and she wants to ensure that we get to the bottom of it.
Are you able to list off the top of your head at the moment which other government agencies are using Thompson and Clark? We know at the moment that there's MB, MPI, the Department of Conservation, now the SIS, Southern Response as well. Any more that you're aware of?
I'm not aware of any more in addition to the ones that you've just listed, but that's not to say that there might not be others, and that's one of the things that the investigation is now going to look at, and I think that's really important that we get to the bottom of the true extent of their relationship with the public sector.
With this SIS relationship that appears to show a very old friend of Thompson and Clark working in the SIS, potentially helping them secure government contracts, do you know if they are still employed by the SIS?
That's a matter for the SIS. I'm not going to comment specifically on allegations regarding any particular departments or agencies. I'd suggest that you raise those directly with the agencies concerned.
So today we've learned that the SIS has concerns that their staff may be acting unprofessionally with Thompson and Clark. We've also learned through the State Services Commissioner that the same thing has happened at the Ministry for Primary Industries. Does that indicate then that it's time for the government to cut all ties with Thompson and Clark? I mean, can the public have faith that government staff are acting appropriately with Thompson and Clark in the future, given this has happened?
Well, the Prime Minister's made it very clear, I've made it very clear, and the Commissioner has made it very clear that we expect all New Zealand public service agencies, whether they be departments or a wider part of the public service, we expect them to act with the highest levels of integrity. And clearly there are some very real and serious questions about the relationship that Thompson Clark's had with parts of the public service. We want to get to the bottom of those. We want to ensure that the reputation of the New Zealand public service is protected, and that's exactly what this investigation is all about.
Can people who have found to be acting unprofessionally stay in their jobs?
Look, I'm not going to preempt what the investigation might find. I think that there's natural justice involved here. We've actually got to get to the bottom of it. But what I'm saying very clearly is that I want New Zealand public service to be above reproach.
Do you have an expectation of when you want this inquiry to be finished by?
It'll take as long as it takes, but obviously I don't want people to be delaying. I want this to be dealt with as quickly as possible.
And that's our reporter, Zach Fleming, speaking to the State Services Minister, Chris Hipkins there. And we've also spoken to the SIS critic, the journalist Nikki Hager, and we will have some thoughts from him on this issue in the next few moments. In the meantime, Checkpoint understands New Zealand football will tomorrow announce an investigation into the conduct of coach Andreas Heraf following a formal letter of complaint penned by multiple members of the Football Ferns squad. The letter, which New Zealand football has refused to release, is understood to detail concerns about Heraf's coaching that date back to a tour to Spain in March. The former Football Ferns captain, Abby Ursek, resigned soon after, and the former All Whites coach, Kevin Fallon, says if he was Heraf, he'd be resigning, and New Zealand football CEO Andy Martin should go too.
I think it's deeper than the coach. I'm very disappointed in what's happened since the Elsham days of Adzed and Fallon and Herbert and Turner. It's gone way down. So I think they've got to have a real look at everything. There you go. I think it's got to be really examined. It could be the final straw, this.
Why has it come to this? How has this happened?
I think it's mainly because we're appointing people who don't know the culture of New Zealand. They haven't got the pioneering spirit. They don't know what the place is like. They don't know the people. And what's more, they don't ask the people.
Yeah, I suppose to be fair, Kevin, you don't need to look far from this conversation to find lots of people that have come from outside New Zealand who have contributed a great deal to New Zealand football.
That's correct, and they've stayed here and worked here. They've not been Johnny-come-latelys where they get a job and then they fly off and then they fail and then they want to come back and so on and so forth. You're looking at people who are putting in, long-term work in the country, and people who want to stay and improve the football. And the football, it's very popular. We know that it's the #1 participation sport in the country. Now we've got to start standing up and start to win things and do better and compete much better, like we did in the past. It's nothing new. 30 years ago, in the 80s, we had a good side.
What responsibility does the board have if it's come to this?
I think it's massive. I think it's absolutely massive, the appointments. And the amazing thing is, there's more money around. You see more full-time jobs. If you go back to yesteryear, and not too far back, you saw much less support and backing from staff than they've got today. So it's not as if that's the case. It's not the case that they're impoverished. That is not the case. They've got to get organised and start wanting to be a little bit more ambitious.
Is it difficult to recruit jobs like this from overseas? Can New Zealand football match the money that other teams can?
I think that's one of the major problems. I think they should look from within the country and back somebody within the country. They talk about their coaching programmes, their coaching schemes, which cost an arm and a leg to go on, but they don't seem to appoint from within. They always look from without. If Charlie Dempsey had not wanted, to do well, he wouldn't have appointed me to go with John Adzed. And same with Ricky Herbert. Ricky Herbert did well. He came through our seam of players and our success and carried that success on when he got the side. He's a local lad. I was a local lad. I've been here for years. Still am here working. So I think they've got to look within the country. There we go.
What about Andreas Heraf has 2 jobs. He's the coach. He's also the technical director. Does that work for someone to do both those jobs?
Well, the technical director it's one of these new appointments. It's one of these, I suppose, where you set the tone of how we play and what we should be coaching and this, that and the other. And I don't know enough about his background to see whether... I don't think he's ever been to a World Cup final, that's for sure. But the thing is, you've got that, and then he started making appointments. I believe he made the all-white appointment, or certainly recommended that. So he's a massive influence on the game. And if he's lost the support of his team, I can't see him staying in that position, because you need someone there who's got the overall feelings of the game and what kind of tactics we're going to play and who we're going to employ and so on and so forth. It's a big position, technical director.
What do you think is the problem with his coaching? Is it just those comments about the negative comments after the Japan game, or is it something about the broader style of his coaching?
I've not actually seen him work, but I've spoken to people within the inner sanctum, And they said that a lot of his work it's not so much that, it's like it's an attitude towards the players. If you've got that attitude towards the players which is not right, you're not going to get the players, as I said, won over to your side, no matter what tactics and what formation you're talking about, or how good your sessions are. I think it's interpersonal dealing with people, and whether you're giving an inspiring message or a negative one, and how you deal with people. A coach is a teacher. He's a teacher. I mean, he's got to teach, but he has to inspire as well. He has to inspire. You can't be a negative teacher. You can't be negative all the time, because people won't get off the backsides and work for you. So it's a very difficult one. If you've lost the players, there's nowhere else to go.
Yeah, is there anything he could do to bring them back? What would you do if you were in his position?
What would I do in his position? If somebody wrote a petition and said they didn't want to work for me, if I'd not got the support of the board, I'd resign. There you are. And to me, it's immaterial. I would like, whether he does or he doesn't, what I would like to see is get the team cracking again and get the girls cracking again, and get the attitude. They're one of our national sides. We've got about 4 or 5. We've got the under-17s, under-20s, the Olympic side, the All Whites and the girls, plus the age group positions in the girls. It's very important. It's part of our game. Girls play football. Girls have babies. They have babies. They play football. It's massive. It's massive.
Any thoughts of who might be a good coach instead?
Wouldn't have a clue. I wouldn't have a clue. I mean, what they've got to do is look around and see what the best that they've got and then get them cracking. Simple. But it's not working now. It's quite obvious.
That's a former All Whites coach, Kevin Fallon, speaking there. Well, a Kapiti Coast District Councillor will be forced to vacate his council seat after being convicted of a sex offence. A conviction was entered against 71-year-old David Scott in the Wellington District Court this afternoon on a charge of indecent assault. It related to an incident in April last year in which he rubbed his genitalia against a council staff member while she was speaking to the mayor during a council morning tea. Anne-Marie May was at the sentencing.
The victim read a statement to the court outlining the effect David Scott's offending had had on her, but Judge Peter Hobbs suppressed all details of that. The defence suggested the entry of a conviction against Scott was punishment enough. However, the judge said there were several aggravating features to the offending, including that Scott was an elected official and the victim was a senior council staff member who could expect to be treated with courtesy and respect.
You have clearly fallen well short of that expectation. Your offending involves a breach of trust in the workplace, which is a place all staff are entitled to feel safe from such behaviour.
The Crown Prosecutor Kate Feltham conceded the offending was not the most serious of its kind and accepted a community-based sentence would be appropriate. Scott's lawyer Mike Antanovic said a few seconds of inexplicable behaviour had changed his client's life at the ripe old age of 71, and Scott felt his good reputation, forged through a career in secondary and university teaching and public service, had been destroyed. He said a conviction would end Scott's career as a district councillor.
And pending any appeal that might be lodged by him against his conviction, he will not be able to attend as a councillor at any council sittings. He believes that he will no longer be eligible to continue in his role as a Justice of the Peace, a position that he tells me he's held with great pride over the past 11 years.
Mr Antanovic said the court process had been stressful and Scott had now had a pacemaker installed. He said his client spent yesterday at Wellington Hospital because of heart problems, but he had attended sentencing today because he wanted to put the incident behind him.
He has experienced deep shame as a result of the verdict and the result of the impact of that verdict and the publicity that this case has brought on him and on his wider family, particularly, obviously, over the past 12 to 14 months.
Judge Peter Hobbs said Scott was not entitled to credit for remorse as he had shown none and still maintained his innocence. He said despite the fact a conviction would end Scott's career on the Kapiti Coast District Council, one needed to be entered.
As a matter of principle, it cannot be correct that elected officials are immune from the consequences of criminal offending because of their elected status. Parliament has clearly turned its mind to such a scenario by providing for it in the Local Government Act. It is therefore a foreseeable and inevitable consequence of offending while in office as an elected official.
The judge said Scott would still be able to stand for re-election if a by-election was held to replace him on the council. Outside the court, Scott said he felt numb with what he described as the injustice of the case. He continued to deny the offending and indicated he will lodge an appeal. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
And returning now to our story about an SIS staff member who appears to have helped the firm Thompson & Clark secure contracts with government departments. Investigative journalist Nicky Hager has been a vocal critic of the SIS, and he told our producer Bridget Burke a short time ago that the latest revelations are hard to take in.
I find this news almost hard to believe. It's shocking because it's not like Thompson & Clark hasn't been well known for many years now for being involved in a succession of controversial activities stretching back over year after year. And so it's incredible that an intelligence agency didn't seem to know about that and didn't seem to understand the significance of it.
Could you just explain to me what's concerning about the cosy relationship between an employee inside SIS and Thompson & Clark?
For a start, the SIS should not be dealing with a private investigating company which has got such a reputation as Thompson & Clark, not just discovered recently, but time and time again with scandal after scandal of the activities they've been involved in, and an intelligence agency should know that. But actually more important than that, this is bigger than one incident which has been revealed by the latest documents. I'm aware that there have been many years of very questionable relationships between Thompson & Clark and people in the SIS. And so I hope that the Director of Intelligence, Rebecca Kitteridge, will not only look at the immediate thing in front of her face, but do a very serious trawl back through the activities of their staff over the last decade to find out how much interaction there's been between this private organisation and our supposedly most secret intelligence people.
What do you think Rebecca Kitteridge might find in this internal investigation, and should she look more broadly than this latest release of emails?
What she needs to look for, what's hidden inside her organisation, is that there are informal, unofficial contacts of all sorts between her staff and Thompson & Clark. This is what I've heard. And that won't be easy to find out, but they're an intelligence agency. This is a very serious matter, and that's what she should be focusing on if she wants to, deal with this obvious lapse in the integrity of her organisation.
And that's the investigative journalist and SIS critic Nicky Hager speaking to our producer Bridget Burke. Well, finally tonight, Olympics New Zealand today hosted 300 young refugees at a sports day in Auckland, alongside 8 Olympians, including gold medal winner Barbara Kendall. The logic behind it's simple. Sport bridges gaps between cultures, making refugees feel like Kiwis fast. Here's Zach Fleming again.
You might be a pass.
Tips from an Olympian.
Come on, Green, we've got to get a goal.
Former black stick Pippa Hayward, one of 8 Olympians, coaching around 300 young refugees at Auckland's Trusts Arena today.
People from different backgrounds, different cultures, different ethnicities, and it is great. Go, you've got it. Oh, bad luck.
Aged 11 to 18, they had a go at 9 sports. Football, golf, hockey, basketball, karate, volleyball, fencing, badminton and cheerleading. It's pretty simple. Sport's a massive part of New Zealand culture, so what better way to settle in to your new country than through playing sport? For 17-year-old Asghar Jafari from Afghanistan, a Year 12 student at Linfield College, sport's the perfect way. When he came to New Zealand 3 years ago, he didn't speak any English, but there was one thing he didn't need to translate.
I play every sport.
What's what?
Every. Cricket, soccer, hockey, basketball, rugby, everything. Sport is my favorite thing.
Both of Asghar's parents were killed by a bomb when he was just 5. He came to New Zealand with his 21-year-old sister and 20-year-old brother, and now has hopes of becoming an electrical engineer.
A lot of my friends play sport. And here you can see I made a lot of friends right now. So I didn't know these guys, like these blue guys. I just met them right now.
A similar story for the Greens' Golriz Garaman, New Zealand's first refugee MP.
Even just the running races, were so daunting to me. It was something I'd never done before. But it does mean that you don't need a common language per se, because on the sports field you kind of have that common language built in. So that was a really big part of the way I integrated.
It's something being recognised at the highest level. The 2016 Rio Olympics were the first to include a refugee team. 10 athletes from South Sudan, Ethiopia, the Congo and Syria competed in athletics, judo and swimming. And former president of the International Olympic Committee, Jacques Rogge, is now the UN's Special Envoy for Youth, Refugees and Sport. His mission, global awareness about the importance of sport for refugee children.
Sport, oh my God, well sport, it just gives them a chance to, there are bonds that are built through sport that just cannot be built in other ways, especially for boys.
Mount Roskill grammar teacher Anzar Cheetah. He jumped at the chance for his students to take part today.
Easy way to break down barriers, easy way to just know someone on a personal level. We need to have the communities meshing, and like I said, that's how you break all these myths. That's how everyone realizes there's nothing wrong with the other side. And then it's harmonious after that. We get a harmonious society.
And potentially future Kiwi Olympians. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
Thanks for that, Zach. And that's Checkpoint for this evening. Thanks for joining us however you chose to, on your radio, on your TV, online. And you can catch up with our stories tonight on rnz.co.nz/checkpoint or on our Facebook page. And for all the latest news, information, feature stories from New Zealand and around the world, go to the rnz.co.nz homepage. John's back tomorrow. Have a great night.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. An RNZ request to the Ministry for Primary Industries has uncovered potentially serious misconduct by several former workers at the ministry in relation to the private investigators Thomson and Clark. The State Services Commissioner Peter Hughes has widened his inquiry into the controversial security firm to cover all government agencies. And it's been revealed that a member of the Security Intelligence Service appears to have helped Thomson and Clark secure government contracts. National says the government has done a U-turn on its overseas home buyer ban, with people in Singapore and foreigners buying from large developers now exempt. And a Kapiti Coast District Councillor will be forced to give up his council seat after being convicted of a sex offence. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Kia ora, Melody Thomas here with Season 2 of the podcast Bang, exploring sex, relationships and intimacy. Tomorrow I'm talking with